We're good. Okay, welcome to the Writing Clinic, everybody. We have got authors Jax Mayer, Catherine Lane, Emma Nichols, and Elsie Morstan here taking your questions on all things writing related. We'll be here for the next 45 minutes or so, so please go ahead and submit your questions on Facebook Live and we will put them to the panel. So I'm Kit Mallory, I'm your moderator. My young adult near future dystopian duology Blackout and Sparks is out now. I am going to come to each of the panel in turn now to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your latest book, and just give us a brief summary, if you don't mind, of what kind of where you are in your writing journey. Emma, can I come to you first?
Okay, so Emma Nichols. I write in the romance genre predominantly, but really lesbian fiction in more broad terms. I stray in terms of the genre mix in which I write. This book that I'm working through at the moment is my 13th, so it could be lucky, it could be really unlucky. We'll see how it goes. And in this one, I'm really heading for kind of a straightforward romance. So it's going to be interesting because I've never written something that straightforward before. And actually, it's amazing how difficult it is to write something that's straightforward. So it's good fun. It's again, it's everything's a part of that journey. So you know, it's a challenge for me, and therefore hopefully it'll be a challenge also. You know, a nice difference for my readers as well.
Yeah, it's really nice to do something different. 13 books, right? You must have really learned a lot over that process. That's amazing.
Yeah, and especially in the last 3 or 4 books. Yeah, big change. Yeah, so.
Cool. Thank you so much, Emma. Lucy, can I come to you next?
Yeah. I guess for my writing, I generally write sci-fi and fantasy, all of it with LGBTQ plus characters because I'm like, why not? Typically also neurodivergent or disabled characters. Again, I think we've had enough books that didn't have them without those characters. So I'm just like, I'm gonna write what I want to write. But I pretty much go across the spectrum of sci-fi and fantasy. Some of it's young adult, some of it's new adult, some of it's adult, some of it's sci-fi, some of it's soft sci-fi, some of it's steampunk, some of it's urban fantasy, some of it's I'm working on some like, you know, secondary world fantasy stuff. So, you know, I'm sort of all over the place. And yeah, in terms of like where I am in my writing journey and stuff. Yeah, I've been writing professionally for the past 5 years. I wrote my first novel about a decade ago, but again, 5 years since I've been publishing. Started doing it when I was in undergraduate at university. It was a thing I did alongside my degrees, and I was like, I'm eventually going to actually turn my degrees into, you know, I'll do a PhD. My undergrad's sort of a professional degree. It's, you know, that's what I'm going to go off and do. And now I'm sort of like in the zone of, I'm sure at some point I'll go back and write the PhD, but the writing's doing all right. So.
Absolutely. Amazing. Thank you, Lucy. Catherine, can we come to you next?
Yes, absolutely. I am Catherine Lane. I also write contemporary lesbian romance and fiction. I alternate between sports books that in a specific sport and sort of something else that tickles my fancy. So I just put out Romancing the Kicker, which was about the first woman in a professional NFL team. And now I'm sort of toying with a Hollywood book. So we'll see what happens there. But yes, I have a bunch of short stories, but I only have like 3.5 books that are actually been published. So while I feel like I've been doing this forever, I guess officially I'm still in the beginning stages of my career. I took a little time off I got a promotion at work, and I was sort of investing more time in my family, and I wasn't quite sure I was going to come back to writing, but now I've come back with a vengeance, and I'm really happy I did.
Oh, amazing. That's really cool. Thank you, Catherine. And Jax, last but not least, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, unfortunately, my Melody, I'm in a meeting. You can show me after. I have a 5-year-old, and no, Melody, I cannot hang it up right now. Just put it in your room. Melody, ask Grandma. Melody, I'm going to mute for a second and take care of this.
Sure thing. Cool. Okay, we will come back to Jax in a second. But while we're waiting, I wonder if I can kind of put out to you all, what is the one piece of writing advice you wish you'd known back when you were a baby writer and you were just starting out? If you could go back in time and give yourselves one piece of advice, what would it be? And Catherine, I wonder, could we come to you first?
Yes. I wish that somebody had told me not to be scared, that there is so much room for all sorts of writers and all sorts of messages, and that you just need to write and see what happens. And you know, I think I stopped myself for a lot of the time before I actually started, you know, submitting. And I wish that somebody had told me there's room for everybody. So just jump in, the water's warm.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much, Catherine. That's really inspiring, and really lovely sentiment. Absolutely. Thank you. Jax, how are you doing? Are we?
I don't know. I genuinely don't know. 5-year-olds with ADHD means there's extra challenges. So yeah. All right. That's one of the things that makes writing fun is I've only been writing since spring of 2018. And so then she was like 2.5, 3.5. I can't do math at this moment. And so finding time to write with family stuff and a day job, I own a business, has been interesting. But let's see. I have 5 books out, 4 of which originally there's a trilogy that involves character Cam that's loosely based on like just my experiences in going through life, being autistic and just going through life basically. And then that really kicked off the rest of this Marine Heart series, where I'm diving into the don't ask, don't tell time period and what it's like to serve when you're not allowed to serve openly. And so there'll be a 5th book that's I'll dive into probably in another year or so at least. And so there's that. I will say they are not military heavy. You don't need to know anything about the military to enjoy them. And then I've got another series, which hopefully book 2, I will be able to get working on in another few months, that starts with Rising from Ash. And that's based at the South Pole and has a demisexual character in it. And so I explore that, just basically how people make relationships work when their sexual needs and intimacy needs maybe don't automatically mesh, and like how do you find a way through that. And so I did that. Right now what I'm working on is a lot. So I'm in a screenwriting program. I'm writing a movie that has it's about a transgender snowboarder trying to find a way through when we don't really have good trans sports policies. And it's got a ridiculously cute lesbian romance as part of it, and they make me super happy. And then I'm also working on a novel that I'm trying not to self-publish it, but I will if I have to. So, and that is a reincarnation of Cam and Sharon, 2 of my characters that don't get the happiest ever after that I wanted. So they're getting reincarnated, and that's actually a musician type romance story, which is super fun. Cool. And then I'm working on a short story compilation, which checks in on all my characters. So I'll close out Cam and Sharon's stories, and then check in with my other couples. So I think there'll be 5 stories in it, and then I'll be able to release that in the next couple months. But amazing. I'm juggling all of those projects at once. It's a little crazy.
Wow. Gosh, so you must be really busy, and like a real diverse range of genres and backgrounds and voices kind of within the panel this evening, juggling all kinds of day jobs and family life commitments. So yeah, please bring on the questions, everybody. I think we've got a really interesting range of experience here, and I'm sure lots of wisdom. So so I wonder, because if I could kind of come back to that question that Catherine just answered really beautifully, I'd like to sort of open that up to the rest of the panel as well, if that's okay. So Lucy, I wonder if I could come to you and ask, for you, what's one piece of writing advice you wish you'd known back when you started out?
Honestly, the most writing advice is subjective and doesn't apply to everyone. You know, especially like trying to navigate space, you know, there's a lot of like, you know, writer's block doesn't really exist or stuff like that, where it's like, well, writer's block might not exist, but executive dysfunction does exist. So like, and those two might get conflated. And so people are telling you, you've just got to push through it. And it's like, no, I don't. I need to, I need to figure out other strategies to work on this. And, you know, so, and often people will say, the most common problem is that you're an overwriter, and so you need to, you know, you definitely need to be cutting words. Everyone needs to be cutting words. That's always the problem. And I'm an underwriter, like hands down, I'm an underwriter. I do not overwrite. My problem is that I need to add more words, and I, you know, I will get cut right down. And a lot of my early drafts are much more like scripts than they are like novels, and I need to flesh that out. But if everyone's telling you, oh no, that's never a problem, no one has that problem, like there's no way that you're that 1% of people who have the problem. Like, sometimes you are, and sometimes you just need to figure out where you fit in, you know, the advice. So, yeah.
I think there is something really important, isn't there, about kind of taking advice or taking writing rules with a pinch of salt, and thinking about kind of how they fit for you and your writing and everything that you've got to work with personally. So yeah, really great advice there, Lucy. Thank you. Emma, how about you? If you could go back and give your newbie writer self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Mute, sorry. Yeah, it's an interesting question, really. I knew nothing. I had no technical background when I started writing, so I just wrote a story, and the story went down very well, so I got lucky. And if I'd had this piece of advice, some of the books I'd written I would never have written, and all the books I've written have gone down well. So it's a bit of a catch-22, but if I'd known POV before I started writing, it would have been a whole different ballgame. And in some ways very good, because my writing would have moved on differently. But in some ways, there are a few books out there that I would not have put out, because they involve so many characters that they're almost omniscient, but without being that. So I think it's, as you say, there's a science of writing and there's the art of telling stories. And I think the two can be completely different. Some people can be very good storytellers, and maybe the writing skills, the craft is not so well formed. And that was me, that's where I'm at. And then you get other people who are very technically sound, who tell stories differently, and you get everything in between there as well. So I'm working on craft issues, even having written 12 books. And that's so that I can write more complex stories, really, so that I can understand how to deliver them.
Absolutely, how to kind of build on that sort of, like, you know, those kind of innate stories that you've got that you want to tell, and how to kind of tell those and express those
tell them better and appeal to a wider audience because you do that. So.
And just for the sake of the audience, POV is a point of view, so point of view character. So the character whose eyes we're seeing through when we read a story. Question from Bev Joy. What is so kind of along similar lines really, but what is the best and worst piece of writing advice you've been given? I'm going to open this up to everybody, so feel free to jump in with an answer. And I suppose to kind of piggyback off what Lucy was saying earlier, I suppose, you know, bear in mind that writing advice is not one size fits all. So yeah, Lucy, and then I'll come to Emma in a second, if that's okay.
I guess this wasn't. I don't necessarily have best advice that I can think of. I just have a worst advice story that was like, a friend sent me this, and it was like one of those, like, that was, if it was going to be a part 2 of my like advice to newbie, or it's like, check the credentials of people that you are like following the writing advice of and stuff, like, because a friend sent me a writing advice blog article that like they found, and they were like, okay, no, you gotta see this, and it was someone saying, it was this guy, it was this, you know, straight white guy presumably, saying, if you're part of a minority, don't write that minority, because it will be too much of a Mary Sue self-insert, and no one wants to. Yeah, you know, I was just like, I don't like.
Yeah.
That's the worst writing advice I've ever seen anyone write. Like, that's hands down the worst I've ever seen. So.
Yeah, that's pretty bad advice.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, yeah. So I think we probably looks like we're pretty unanimous on that one. Emma, how about you? Best and worst piece of writing advice you've been given?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the worst piece of advice I was given was you shouldn't even write.
Oh.
I got an email from an editor who said, "Sir, just because you think you have a keyboard doesn't mean you can write." And that was in an email, that was in writing to me. And you know, if I hadn't have launched my first book at that point in time, I wouldn't have launched it. And that's how powerful that piece of information can be. And I think anyone coming into this industry who wants to write, again, it goes back to that adage, write. Don't listen to anybody, actually, except yourself, and let your words do the talking for you. Because if I hadn't have put my book out, the other 11 and coming on the 12th would not have gone out there. And I think, you know, a lot of readers would have missed out because those books would not have existed. So yeah, I mean, everyone has an opinion, and this was a you know, well-known and well thought of editor. But there again, I think you have to separate the difference between, I mean, I come from a psychology background, and you have an academic psychology and you have popular psychology. And I think you also have to understand writing in the context of academic writing and real high-level technical writing versus popular writing and popular reading, which is what the majority of our readers read for. They read for the story and the entertainment value, and they will forgive us for not being perfect in our writing skills. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm really sorry that you had that experience, Emma. I mean, that's not even advice. That's just somebody being awful, I think. So, you know, and I think there's really something really important, you know, feedback and critique is really valuable. It's how we kind of get better as writers, but, you know, being mindful of how you give that feedback and the impact that it has on other people is so important. Catherine, can I see you think you had something to add. Can I come to you?
Yes, please. Susan X. Maher told me once that you should always have, your main character should always have friends. And that actually was a really good piece of writing advice for me, because it allowed my characters to expand out of the romance and into their own personalities. And I think that that's like, you know, it feeds on each other, that when you have characters who are, you know, talking to their mothers or talking to their best friends or even talking to their dogs, right? That you are able to develop them in a certain way that allows them to bring even more back into the romance. So, you know, I was sort of a little ashamed that I hadn't thought of that on my own, but as soon as she said it, it was like one of those moments where I'm like, oh, you know, it was wonderful. And I think it actually has changed the subsequent books that I wrote after I got that piece of advice.
That's great advice, I think. You know, I think the more you get to know your characters, the better. And you do that by putting them in different situations and with different people and seeing how they react. And even if those scenes don't make it into like the final draft of the book, they're not wasted because you have got to know your characters a little bit better through them. So yeah, thank you, Catherine. That's really, great advice. We have a question from Laura, a really good question, actually, which is, how do you discipline yourself to write? How do you discipline yourself to start and finish a project? Which arguably are two very different skills, I would say, the starting and the finishing. So yeah, I'm going to open that up to the panel. Feel free to jump in. Jax, go for it.
So I'm going to be the annoying person that doesn't have to discipline myself to do it at all, because writing is my sanity. So for me, if I have, like, I've literally probably taken less than a month off of writing in the past like 2.5 years total. And that's because it's enjoyable and I'm writing things that I enjoy. But also what helps is I call them alpha readers. They're friends that are reading as I write, and they keep me excited. So if I get a little stuck, I can brainstorm. And so a lot of times, like, I get discouraged if I get too stuck with them, right? And so having like extra people to kind of bounce ideas off of, or just to be like, yeah, this is great, you know, it makes it easy to keep going because it keeps the excitement up. Though I have lately, because it's NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, and I'm way too busy to do full nano, but I've used it as a thing to be like, even if I'm running out of time, I write for 20 minutes before I go to bed. And it might not be a lot of words, but it's just checking in. And so you can set really simple, don't put big goals on it. Don't be like, I have to write 1,000 words or for an hour. Anything more than 0, you could call that a victory because you're moving forward on it. Or if you just had a conversation with someone to help you brainstorm what's coming next, because I'm a pantser, there's not outlining happening. So that's my advice to kind of avoid that problem. It's also easy for me to hyper focus on that stuff. So not everyone has that same experience. It's one of those things where the ADHD and autism come in handy because I will hyper focus on this and it's easy then, even if it's slow.
I love that. Thank you, Jax. That's really, and we've had another question about sort of critique partners and beta readers that we'll come to in a second. But that's a really important point. That actually, you know, when you've hit that point in your book where you're like, I don't know what happens next, and you know, my characters are being really annoying, and I hate my writing. Actually, having someone you trust that you can share that with, who can get excited and bounce ideas around with you, is really, really valuable, isn't it? So yeah, thank you, Jax. Anyone else want to kind of jump in there about kind of what helps you to kind of start and finish? Emma?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's very simple because it's a job, it's not a hobby. So you know, and I have children, so, and I have to do the school runs, and you know, I have family, I have house, I have all the other things around that as well. But if I wasn't doing that, I'd be doing consultancy, or I'd be doing a day job too. So it is a day job, and it is full-time job for me in that sense. So I basically have a routine of coming back from dropping the kids off. I get on and work. I don't, you know, go and shopping or or find another distraction. I get on and I work. And you know, I suppose it's having that routine of always having worked that you just, it makes it easier. If I was working full-time and having to come back and write, which I know a lot of authors do, man, that's a lot harder. That is harder. It's so much tougher to be doing a full-time job, you know, an intellectual job of whatever that might be, taking up 8 hours of your day, and then coming back and trying to fit in 2 or 3 hours writing, you know, and hats off to people who can do that, because it is tough.
Thank you, Emma. I mean, you've touched on something really important there, which is that there are so many other demands on all of our time. I think, you know, whether you're a full-time writer or whether you're doing it around your day job, and you know, there's always something else to be doing, isn't there? You know, there's always like laundry to do, or you know, something that could be kind of taking your time. And I was listening to a podcast recently that they said something that really stuck with me, which is that if you make everything a priority, then nothing's a priority. And sometimes you kind of have to make writing your priority, and even if that means other things you have to put other things aside for a little while. And I think that's, yeah, kind of creating that space and keeping that space, protecting it, is really, really important. Thank you, Emma. Anyone else, any sort of thoughts from anyone else there about kind of how you sort of keep that sort of discipline, that structure, how you motivate yourself, before we move to the next question? I'm going to come to
you. Lucy can go. You can go first, because you might say what I was going to say.
We'll go to Lucy and then we'll come to Jax.
I was just going to say that, like, I agree with what both Jax and Emma are saying. Like, I find it super easy when I'm in a routine. I can actually hyper focus on stuff sometimes. But obviously in the past year, things have not been in a routine. Things have been very, you know, things have changed rapidly every couple of months. And so being jostled out with my routine a lot. And so for me, it's just sort of remembering why I like writing. It's always just like coming back to, you know, why am I doing this? Why am I not, you know, why am I not looking for like a job doing something else? Why am I not, you know, and just coming back to, you know, why I enjoy writing and reminding myself of that, and then just kind of picking myself up again after my routine has been disrupted, after I'm like, you know, oh God, but I don't want to, you know, oh God, I can't, like, I don't want to, and it's, you know, oh, because there's expectations and people are waiting, you know. I did find it much easier to hyper focus on things and be like, yeah, this is what I do all the, when people weren't reading my books. Now I'm like, oh no, what if people don't like this one? What if they like the last one? What if they don't like this one and it's bad, and then everyone hates it? It's just, no, it's like coming back to, you know, why I'm doing it and why I'm enjoying it, and then just kind of picking myself up and being like, it's okay to just do a little bit and just do, or figure out new ways to do it. I'm constantly changing, like, okay, well, what I've been doing isn't working. So do I dictate for a while? Let's try dictation for a while and see if that'll work. Let's, handwrite into a drawing tablet so that my computer picks that up into text. Let's do that for a while. Let's do full words for a while. Let's do write or die for a while. Let's, and it's fine to swap and try a new technique, and something that did work for you might not keep working, and that's okay. You can find other things that will now work.
That's, I think, great advice. Well, no matter where you are in your writing journey, Lucy, just to remember why you're doing it, and also to try new things, try different things out, and see what works for you. Fits around your life. Jack, sorry, you were going to kind of you were going to add something to that, I think.
Yeah, I want to add in the flip side to this, which is executive dysfunction is a very real thing, and there's no amount of discipline that overcomes executive dysfunction. You have to go with coping skills and self-care, and you need to address other aspects of yourself. So if you're a person that's like, no, I really love love this story, I want to write it, and everything is there, your why is there, and you still can't do it, that's executive dysfunction. And there are, I would say, go to Twitter, look up executive dysfunction, and look at the people with ADHD that have found some good strategies, or go onto YouTube, or ask me, or probably, I'm guessing Lucy has stuff too, because that's, you can't just will yourself to overcome executive dysfunction like that, and you'll just make yourself feel like garbage, and that doesn't help.
Definitely be kind to yourself on that one. It's about executive dysfunction, writing on your phone, because you don't have to move. If you have your phone you don't have to go anywhere. If you have your phone on you, you can just type it into Google Docs or your notes app, and just from wherever you are, just you don't have. So often my executive dysfunction means I can't get out of bed, so I just do that. I'm not getting up. I'm not getting up for the next hour or so. I know I need, but my phone's there. I can still start typing. But also I would say, especially with ADHD, people should look up the wall of awful if that is a specific problem, because that is a helpful strategy for that might be the problem. The wall of awful might be the thing stopping you from doing the thing.
I suppose, just to kind of, for the benefit of people who maybe aren't so familiar with that language, maybe aren't quite sure what executive dysfunction is. Executive function is basically how we get things done in life. So it's our ability to motivate ourselves and plan and start tasks and see them through to the end, and all the kind of many different facets that kind of come with kind of taking a task from thinking about it and planning it right the way through to actually finishing it. So there's many different facets to it, and executive dysfunction is essentially just a difficulty, with any part of that, or many parts of that process, and there can be lots of different reasons why that develops, or why people experience that, but I think Lucy and Jax are absolutely spot on in saying that it is not just about kind of willing yourself to do it, or telling yourself that, or being disciplined enough. It's about figuring out how you work and what works for you, and being compassionate to yourself, and working with your brain, no matter however your brain does work, rather than trying to force yourself to do what you think you should be doing. So thank you so much. It's really interesting, and I'm sure really helpful for lots of people kind of sort of dealing with those things. I'm going to come to another question from Addison now, which is that for those of you who are pantsers, so for a pantser, this is someone who does not plot but just flies by the seat of their pants, or is half pantser, half outliner. How do you ever write like wildfire and then get stuck on a section, and how do you get out of that rut if that happens to you? Jax?
Super pantser. Though I've become more of a plantser as I go out of necessity, but I write really intuitively, so it's a little hard to describe it sometimes, but I can usually tell the difference between either it really just comes down to I usually made a poor decision at some point, and so I try to look back and go, where did I start getting bored? Where did it just kind of ramble? Where does it seem to not forward the story anymore? And I try to go back a little bit and go, okay, well, I was here. Now, instead of this person saying this, they're going to say this, or they make a different action, right? So it's like a choose your own adventure book. So I back up to the point to where I'm like, no, this is all still good. And then I change something. And I actually did that very specifically in Marine Awakening, where I was like, man, I don't really know what's happening with this scene. But I feel like something has to be there. And I just changed one line of dialogue. And then just kind of, I put a bunch of spaces in the document and just started writing fresh from there. And then it seemed back together. And now the scene worked a lot better. And so usually that's what I do is like, if I'm bored, I mean, okay, in editing, we all get bored. But if you're bored while you're writing the first draft, that's a sign that you need to go back and rework it, because everyone's going to be bored too. Don't do that. And then I usually will have someone beta read it and give feedback if I'm still stuck. But that's what I recommend. Backtrack a little, change something and see what comes of it. And then if you get too stuck, ask someone for help.
Great advice. Thank you, Jax. I think I found when I was writing Sparks, it happened to me a few times, and it's multi-point of view. So there are 4 different viewpoint characters. And what I found actually was when there was a chapter that just was not working for me, actually, invariably, it was because it was written from the wrong point of view. It was the wrong character's voice. And there were a few chapters in it where as soon as I went back and started writing through someone else's eyes, I was like, oh, this is what, now it works. So that was really interesting. That was a real learning curve for me. Anyone else got any? Have we got any other pantsers here? Anyone who ever kind of finds themselves really into it and then getting bogged down? How do you get out of that if that happens to you? Or do we have lots of super organized plotters in our midst?
I mean, I started out really pantser big-esque, and I still am more inclined to do that, but I will have an idea of the opening scene and the middle of the book, and I don't always know where it's going to finish. But I'm starting to try to get into a bit more planning, because it does make life a lot easier in some respects. But I also struggle with the fact that as soon as I get writing, my characters might take it in a different direction, and I've got this plan, and I go, ah, shit, they should be going that, they should be doing that chapter should be that done, and it's it's an odd process to get into. But I think it can be a good default to go to as well. If you are stuck, you go, right, well, okay, well, actually, I should have been heading in this direction. So, yeah, I mean, and it's back to individual styles, though, isn't it? Again, you kind of go with what works for you. But if you get stuck, I think, as Jack says, usually there's something that's amiss. A mark has been missed somewhere, or or maybe a chapter's not delivered what it should do. And just a bit of backtracking, you can kind of unwind it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, Emma, I think that I would agree with absolutely everything that you've said there. I think, that's really, really great advice. I
would say, and real quick, worst case scenario, just start reading from the beginning. You're going to catch where things start to go awry there too.
I think that just kind of just piggybacking off what you were saying there, Emma, I think there is something about writing character-driven narratives, where when you're writing your draft, you're getting to know your characters, and invariably that might mean that it takes you in different directions than you first expected, and that's okay, because you're getting to know your characters as you write them, and they may not be quite who you expected them to be when you first started out, and that's all right, actually. Okay, so we have a question from Bev Joy, who asks, how important are beta readers? This is a good question, because we've had those mentioned a couple of times now. So beta readers are your kind of, once your book is kind of drafted, you might give it to other people to kind of read and give feedback on. So it's slightly different from alpha readers, which Jax was referring to earlier. So alpha readers are the people who kind of read as you're drafting, as you're writing your first draft. Beta readers are the first people you might give your completed, but not totally polished draft to for feedback. Panel members, how important are they? And how do you kind of sort of work with those relationships? How do you manage those? Catherine, go for it.
I think beta readers are obviously crucial, right? Because you're sitting in your own kitchen and you're writing, and then all of a sudden the story, walks out the door and starts meeting other people. But But I think you have to choose your beta readers really, really carefully. I mean, I don't think that you're throwing it out to 50 people and just sort of culling their comments and figuring out what you want to hear. I think you need to choose your beta readers. You need to absolutely trust them. You need to know their strengths and weaknesses before you go in, before you get their comments back. And I think you also have to use them to decide, like if you get a comment, sometimes I get a comment back and I'm like, oh my God, that is 100% right. I don't know why I didn't see it. This is going to make the book, infinitely better. But sometimes I get a comment back and I'm like, you know what? No, I completely disagree. I'm absolutely going to double down on what they feel is a mistake and either try to make it work, or I'm okay with it. I think it actually works and this is why, and I can explain it. So I think I've sort of answered your question very broadly, but my takeaway is that beta readers are unbelievably crucial. And I would rather them give me only stuff that they don't like, as opposed to saying, this is great, this is wonderful, oh, I love this, right? And everybody wants to hear, every writer wants to hear that. But the more valuable stuff is, this doesn't work and this is why it doesn't work. And if they can even go so far to say, and this is what I would do, that's like gold.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you, Catherine. Emma,
again, I think these terms are really interesting because I don't actually have beta readers in that context at all. So, and I think there needs perhaps a separation between people who read your book have an ARC copy of it, who read it on the promise of giving a review, versus, as you say, a beta reader who is giving feedback, or an alpha reader who's giving you feedback early on in this. I have a couple of people in my team, and I like to think of teams in that sense. So it's basically a team again, absolutely, as Catherine says, of people I trust, who will work through with me, and Jack's nodding, work through with me the story and the storyline and the characters, and they're not editors, they're not professionals. That comes after that process. So there's a different stage at each level, but I don't have ARC readers who are ARC for a review, which is quite common. And I think, that's great if you want to do that. It's an admin process you need to manage. And of course, having lots of reviews very early on for a book, people see that, and that's used for a marketing perspective, generally very helpful. Whereas the other side of it is helping you to develop and create the book that doesn't fall foul of something that you've missed, because, as Catherine says, you're the only one reading your work, in a dark corner, for X number of months, and thinking, crikey, and by the time you've been through your script 4 or 5 times, you can't see black from white, really.
Absolutely.
So it's helpful to have those a small group of people who you trust, and as you say, who that their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, I think that's really key, isn't it, to have people that you trust and you have a good working, relationship with, and who know the kind of book you want to write, I think, but also who you can trust to give you honest feedback, and tell you, when something's not working, and it's not that you have to take every piece of criticism or every piece of feedback and change your book accordingly, but it's important to trust the people who are giving you that feedback, and so you can make a decision about what you do with that, as Catherine was saying. Jax, you had something to add there.
Yeah, the other way that I use beta readers is that I always write, I write a lot of own voices things. However, own voices is still only my own voice, right? So I always get extra beta readers who are both not in that group and those that are in that group, so that I make sure the people that don't, like the people that aren't autistic, the people that aren't demisexual, the people, that haven't been in the military, that they can still follow the story. And then I've got the people that do have that same experience, to make sure that I'm not saying something that would actually be harmful to the community, that would be misleading or create misunderstanding. And so I use that to gauge, to make sure that I'm hitting the wide audience that I want, and that I'm not writing something that's so narrow that the only people that are going to like it are this tiny subset of people. So whether there's a whole group of people called sensitivity readers, and if you can afford to get a sensitivity reader, I recommend it. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that, but I'm also pretty poor yet, so I can't necessarily afford to pay for sensitivity readers, but I find beta readers readers that are very generous and with their time and willing to read over and give me that feedback throughout. So just, make sure that keep that in mind. If you're writing something, especially outside of your experience, please get beta readers that share that experience.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I can't echo that strongly enough. I think sensitivity readers are so important. Thank you, Jax. That's a really well made point. We have a question from L. Armstrong. Good question, which is, how do you write your blurbs? I know this strikes fear into the heart of many writers. I can see some grimaces. You are not alone there, Catherine. I feel very similar. Lucy, is that a wave? Have you got some wisdom to impart to us? Please do.
Yes, because I still don't like writing blurbs. I still find it really difficult. But I'd every single blurb I'd read all sorts of, I'd read books on how to write blurbs. Couldn't get it to stick. I think it's Libby Hawker has a YouTube video that's just how to write a blurb. It's a really good breakdown of just here's, it's like just some simple points like, who is your main character? What is their problem? What stands in the way of them getting that thing? Like, and what are the stakes? And it's just this breakdown. And like, since I started following that, it's like, all right, cool. There's a blurb because it's good to go. So that was definitely for me the like, all right, life-changing. Someone's broken it down into the bare essential, like a step-by-step process that I can actually follow and I can actually do. And so yeah, I'm like 99% sure that it's Libby Hawker who wrote Take Off Your Pants, who has the YouTube video on writing a blurb. So
make a note of that. Thank you, Lucy. That's great advice. Anything from anyone wants to add to that?
Yeah, for romances, there's a slight variation on that. And it's like your main character. So character 1, where are they at? Kind of what's their problem? Character 2, where are they at? What's their problem? How do they come together? Or what's their conflict as a couple? That's paragraph 3. And then paragraph 4 is your lead into kind of just your hook to bring people in. And that structure is what I've followed. It's the only way I can get anywhere on a blurb.
It's tough, isn't it? Who knew it would be so hard to boil down your book into 100 words? I think a really good piece of advice I was given is that every word counts. You've got kind of 100 words maximum, and so that your language choice and the emotions that every single word evokes, and the sense that gives of your book is really, really important. So to kind of keep it tight, but also to really kind of scrutinize every word, every description, and think about, what is the sense this is giving of your book, and is this what I want to be conveying for someone who's going to read this and digest it in 30 seconds. So anything else anyone wants to add to that one? I think blurbs are hard, but we've had some great advice there. Thank you. So we do have one question, another question, which is, how do you deal with negative reviews? This is from Bev. Bev says, Emma, I know you don't read them, which is probably a very sensible strategy. Anybody else? How do you deal with negative reviews?
Do you want to go, Lucy?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I do have a don't read reviews policy. Sometimes people will send me their reviews regardless. If they will email them to me, and if they feel that I desperately need to read them. Deep breaths, lots of chocolate, sort of, and and sometimes people are just wrong. A lot of times people just, it's useful to remember a lot of times people just don't like your genre. Sometimes people don't like the way that you, they might like your genre, but they don't like the way that you write. It might just be that, like, you have an audience that your writing appeals to, and they're not it. And that's, a huge chunk of it. I have had experiences with writing own voices fiction with people just being wrong, who aren't part of my community, emailing me to tell me that here's a review I wrote about how ill-informed and bad and it's one of those things where I'm just sitting there going, okay, well, I belong to this community and I wrote my master's degree on this, so my master's dissertation on this, so At which point, I think it's largely just, again, deep breaths, walk away. Also, don't check your email when you're on holiday. That was it's not fun when you're, but yeah, it sometimes you can't avoid it, and sometimes it is just about like that kind of emotional regulation. Do some yoga, do some meditation, whatever is the thing that helps you get back to your emotional baseline and disconnect like what people are saying about your books from yourself, and don't take it as personal criticism. Go down the list of like, is this actually valid criticism? I mean, if it is, then absolutely take a look at it, think about it, take a look at what you're doing, but be honest. Is it just that this person isn't your reader? And at that point, actually, is it a problem of marketing? Like, how did your book get in this reader's hands, and how do you prevent that from happening next time? Like, how do you make sure that you're targeting the right people? So yeah, just
that's a great point. Actually,
I would say broad strokes. Don't read the reviews, but if you can avoid, if you can't avoid, which sometimes you can't, because sometimes people really want you to know.
Be kind to yourself. And that's a great point about marketing, actually, Lucy. Thank you. I'm going to come to Catherine and then Emma, if that's okay. Catherine, tell us about your strategy for reviews.
Well, I mean, obviously, nobody likes a bad review, and certainly there are those people out there that are, just giving any lesbian book a 1 star and moving on.
Have you had that guy as well on Goodreads? Oh, it's like a rite of passage almost, isn't it?
It is a rite of passage. I mean, when I got my first one, I'm like, yeah, I've made it. But in any case, besides him, I think you really need to figure out what the review meant to do, because I think sometimes reviewers who review books, the review is more about them than it is about you or your story. And I think you've got to separate that. It's really hard to write a book, and it's, I think, probably easier to criticize a book that is written. And so maybe some people take that tact, like, I'm just going to go out and criticize. But having also said that, I think that there was, early in my career, there were a few reviews that actually helped me. I mean, I looked at them and it was a very specific critique of what I had done in my first book. And I'm like, that is absolutely right. And I've never made that mistake again, because I really took it and brought it in. I mean, I do read my reviews. Because a lot of them say things where you're like, oh, they actually understood what I was trying to do, or I'm really glad that worked out for that that person, or wow, they saw something in my book that I didn't even see or mean. And I think obviously when you release a book, you've opened it up to everybody, and I think you have to sometimes take the good with the bad.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Catherine. Wise words. Emma.
I think also it's worth remembering there's a bit of a numbers game here as well, because the number of people who actually do review a book is very, very small relative to the number of people who read it. And you're, I think, better keeping your eyes on the sales of your book and making sure that you're hitting your target audience, rather than worrying about the odd person who picks up your book from, maybe you've put a sale out there, or they found it through some other way and they're destined to write something nasty, whether they even get through it or not. And at the end of the day, is a reader's perception, and it's lovely, and it's amazing, and it's fantastic when those readers come through who absolutely adore what you do, and they've read your book so many times, and they are avid followers, readers, and are willing to review. And I thank those people, because it helps those who don't know me as an author have some idea of what my audience thinks of my books. And we're all after expanding our audience all the way down the line. So getting kind of affected by one person's perspective, as you say, it's something good to take out of it that you can use, but very often it's an opinion, it's not a critique. And I would still say, I have an editor to do that for me, to do that critique. If I can't trust my editor, I'm certainly not going to trust somebody who's writing a review for me that doesn't know me from Adam, or my writing from Adam. So, you know, if somebody's got that kind of advice to say, I think please email me directly rather than sticking it in a review. Because if it's, you know, if it's something negative, just please contact me. You know, I want to know that, but you know, does it help the rest of the world knowing something that has no context around it?
I think there is something about that really helpful about the willingness to be kind of open to kind of feedback and critique and learn and grow from that, and as you say, to be able to kind of take that sort of in balance and accept that, you know, negative reviews are going to happen. You could be the most you could be the best writer in the world, and there would still be someone who you wouldn't be their cup of tea, and that's okay, and that's all right. We're coming up to finishing, but Lucy, I think Lucy and Jax, I think you both had sort of more to say, so I'm just going to come to each of you for a kind of closing comment, if that's okay, and then we'll wrap up. Yeah, so Lucy.
I was just going to say, with because Emma mentioned like people picking things up on sales and stuff, and just because it tied into what I was saying earlier about like marketing and stuff, like it's hard, especially when you want to make your books as accessible as possible to people. I have my first book and most of my series are available for free, and I have like free prequels and stuff, and like, you know, and that's largely because I know that a lot of my audience, like, you know, it can't access, you know, don't necessarily have the cash to access books, and so I want them to like be able to access at least some of my work and stuff. But yeah, I definitely found that like if like there's no amount of warning, there's no amount of content warnings, there's no amount of like, you know, genre appropriate blurbs that are like covers. If your book is free, people will pick it up and just start reading. And I do this as a reader as well, but I don't really have, I have a high tolerance. I like, you know, if I read something where I'm like, you know, if I'm halfway through like a steamy romance book and I'm like, oh, they did incest again, I just put it down. And I'm like, it's not for me, it's for some, you know, but someone else's, you know, someone else obviously likes that stuff. But a lot of people who don't have that high tolerance have that exact same reading habit, apparently. If, you know, the book's free, so I'm just going to start reading. And yeah, so that's the difficulty of like, if you want to have, you know, free books and you want to, you know, especially do like having the first book in your series be free can be very helpful to get people to start reading you and stuff. It's like, you know, lowers that barrier of entry. It lowers that barrier of entry though to people who otherwise would not pick up your book and otherwise, you know, would have paid attention to, you know, again, content warnings and stuff. Like I big bold all over blurbs, you know, this has this content, and then reviews are like, I can't believe that this book had this content. And I'm like, I mean, I tried. I really tried to. Yeah. So there's nothing that you can do to if you know, if you make your books more widely accessible, people will just pick them up and will just read them regardless. And yeah, there's every chance that they're not your audience. And I haven't really found a way around that other than a series where I think actually they need higher content warnings. I only make available to buy direct from my website, because I'm like, all right, well that's then brought up the barrier for entry, and you know, by, you know, it's that kind of negotiation for me. But otherwise, it's, you know, haven't really found a way around that one.
Yeah, and perhaps it's more about the way we kind of accept that those things will happen, and that some people who read our books may not be may not be our intended audience, or may not be the people who perhaps will fall in love with them, but perhaps that's okay. Jax, one last thing from you, if that's okay, before we say goodnight.
So it's easy to tell when someone's not your reader when you read a review, but it's still hard when people's criticism. So I write deeply personal stories directly based off of aspects of myself. So when they say, and it's not common, but when they'll say like, it felt too, how to even describe it, just the way that Cam interacts and stuff, I'm like, that's the autism, that's the point, that's why it was written that way, and that personally hurts me because that's based off of me, right? Or if they criticize butch characters, or they criticize the demisexuality parts, like, I'm like, those are harder to shake because it feels like a direct attack on me and my identity. So those are hard and those suck. But I would say maybe for the readers, keep in mind, maybe be a little kinder when you're dealing with things that are actually based in people's identities, even if it's not the author's identities, because people will read those comments that have those identities and it will hurt them. So maybe try to be kind, but you know, it is what it is. And mostly in lesfic, people are pretty cool. But you know, for the rest of them, you just kind of go, I try not to look at them, honestly. I try to filter and I just read my 5 and 4s because I need the boost sometimes for my confidence.
And I suppose with those kind of things, it's sort of remembering that though there may be people out there who will kind of respond in that way, that there will be other people who that book finds its way to, who will see themselves reflected in that book and see their identity and their experience reflected in it, and that will really mean something and you know, be something really important to them. Yeah, and sometimes holding that in mind, I think is really important too. That's kind of why we do it, right? So
exactly.
Yeah, great. Thank you all so much. I think that is about all we've got time for this evening. You've all been absolutely wonderful. It's been a really insightful, interesting discussion. I know I've learned a few things, and we've had some really great questions from the audience. So thank you all for watching. So Jax Mayer, Elsie Mawson, Catherine Lane, Emma Nichols, you've all been amazing. Thank you so much for being here this evening. You can check out all of the authors' intro videos on the WSL website, as well as the details and the timings for all of tomorrow's readings and panels. There's lots more fun stuff going on tomorrow. So thank you so much, everybody, and good night.
Thank you.
Thanks.